The Christmas Owl. Based on the true story of a little owl named Rockefeller. Once in a little town, in a little front yard, lived a little owl high in the branches of a very big tree. For the curious little owl, not even a year old, the world was filled with wonder. Streams were for splashing, forests were for flying, and friends of all feather were merrily made. One day, when winter had arrived, the town around her began to transform. Houses were decorated, lights were strung, jingles and music filled the icy air. Little Owl watched and listened, and that night, when darkness came, the whole town glittered and glowed. "What is going on here?" she asked her friends. "Christmas," said Moose. "And what is that?" Little Owl asked. "Not sure," said Rabbit. "No idea," said Skunk. "No one knows," said Squirrel, "but it happens every year." The next morning, confused as ever, Little Owl flew home, where she found some people standing around the big tree's trunk. "It's beautiful," said one of them. "It'll be a perfect Christmas tree," said another. "A Christmas tree?" Little Owl wondered. "My home is Christmas?" The workers began attaching wires and ropes to the tree. As Little Owl hid in the shadows, the branches pulled tight around her. She was trapped. Then she heard a roar. The tree shook, spinning and swaying. It was lowered down onto a truck. Little Owl was dizzy. "Is this Christmas?" "Say goodbye to our tree," someone called as the big truck rumbled away. "Your tree?" wondered Little Owl. "How could anyone own a tree?" For hours and hours they drove. The cold wind rushed beneath her feathers. Little Owl was hungry, but there was nothing to eat. She was thirsty, but there was nothing to drink. She was lonely, and her friends were far, far away. "Is this Christmas?" Pinned against the tree, she tried to sleep. At last, 3 days later, the truck came to a stop. Again, the tree jostled and lifted. Then all at once, its branches spread. Worn and weak, Little Owl edged out into the light. "Where am I?" Below her, hundreds of people stomped and scowled, and cars clogged the streets. Above, strange towers scraped the sky. "This is not home." She tried to flap her wings, but she wasn't strong enough. As her eyes were closing, she saw, "There's an owl in here." When Little Owl awoke, she was in a box. It opened and a new face peered inside. "Hello, little one. I'm Ellen. Let's get you inside." Whatever Christmas was, it seemed to have gotten inside the house. The place was warm and cozy, and it seemed oddly to be made for birds. "Why are you here?" Little Owl asked. "Broken legs," said Hawk. "Broken wings," said Falcon. "But Ellen looks after us until we're ready to fly free again." After all this, Owl wondered, could a human really help? Over the next days, Little Owl gulped down water and gobbled thawed mice. She was given an x-ray, and every day Ellen checked her feathers, eyes, and ears. Ellen is helping. Could Christmas be caring? Could Christmas be kind? Ellen held Little Owl in her hand. "After all you've been through," she said, "it's a miracle you're alive." But was Little Owl ready to fly? "Almost," cried her new friends. Ellen smiled. "Almost," she said. At last, at dusk on Christmas, they drove to the top of the mountain. Ellen lifted Little Owl from the box and raised her arm. "You're free," she said. "Welcome home." For the last time, the friends looked at each other. Then Little Owl flapped her wings and flew higher and higher into the sky. But she wasn't going home just yet. When at last she reached the very big tree, which was now a very big Christmas tree, she settled on her favorite branch. Bright and brilliant, the city was not what she remembered. The cars had disappeared. The great towers were merrily lit. The people were smiling and skating. Some were even singing. They held hands and hugged. All, it seemed, were eager to love. Is this Christmas? Yes, Little Owl thought. It must be. For some time, Little Owl sat, basking in the golden glow. When at last the moon peeked above the building, she knew it was time to go home. "You're back," her friends cried, gathering round. "And just in time for Christmas," squealed Moose. "Whatever that is," added Rabbit. "Actually, I may have learned something about it," said Little Owl as they nuzzled close. "Could you tell us?" "Of course," said Little Owl, knowing full well that this was Christmas too. The real story of Rockefeller. On a quiet day in November 2020, I received a phone call from a woman asking if Ravensbeard takes owls for rehabilitation. I told her we did, and there was a moment of silence before she said, "Okay, I'll call back when my husband comes home from work. He's got the baby owl tucked into a box for the long ride." I asked where her husband had found the owl, and she said, "In the Christmas tree at Rockefeller Center." A few hours later, a little face was looking up at me. It was a saw-whet owl, the smallest kind in the northeastern United States, which is why people often think they must be babies. I brought the little owl back to Ravensbeard, where my staff and I gave it fluids, warmth, and all the tender mice it could eat. After visits to the vet and an owl specialist, we discovered the owl, whom we had named Rockefeller, or Rocky for short, was a girl and a first-year hatch set to migrate south for the winter. By this time, Rocky had become a media sensation, and we were receiving hundreds of texts, emails, and calls about her condition. We protected her from the attention during her 8 days at Ravensbeard, which she spent gaining weight and strength. Then, at dusk on a cool winter's eve, when the alarm birds, crows, blue jays, etc., were asleep, we brought Rocky to a quiet spot in a nearby conifer forest. We wanted her to have all night to start her migration, and by dawn we knew she would find a safe place to sleep away the day. She would repeat this pattern until she found her way to a warm and food-rich environment. As I released my grip on Rocky, she paused and looked directly into my eyes. Then, once she readied herself, she flew perfectly to a nearby white pine. She jumped to a higher branch, and in a blink she was gone. With a sigh of relief, I watched the tiny wood nymph disappear, a memory I will never forget.